Hello and welcome to The Hybrids Are Coming. The Hybrids Are Coming, spreading the word on the evolution of the virtual revolution. We hope you enjoyed the opening video montage of Paul Revere's famous ride, but we are going to be taking you forward in time, not back. So just a quick introduction of the two of us, your panelists. I'm Susan Guthrie, and I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Debra Dupree, who is the principal and founder of Relationships at Work. And if I can just mention, she's just, Relationships at Work is having its 10th anniversary right as we speak. Congratulations, Dr. D.
Thank you.
Both of us have our contact information here, our emails. Because this is a recorded program, there won't be Q&A at the end. So please feel free to take down our contact information or copy the slides. We'll have a copy that a link to the slides in on the page. You can feel free to send us questions as we go forward, telling you about the hybrids are coming. The hybrids are coming. So Debra, do you want to run over what we're going to cover in our program today?
Absolutely. One of the things that has been moving so quickly is all around the technology. And so that's where Susan is going to help us take a deeper dive into where we've been and where we are and where we see things going. And with that, though, we'll also talk about the psychological aspects. We've all heard about Zoom fatigue, right? Well, it's still around, and there's even more for us to consider as we move to this new hybrid world. And of course, we'll summarize with some key takeaways for you so that you have some idea of where to go and what to do and how best to get there.
But first, we are going to take you back a little bit in time. Now, not to 1775, like Paul Revere's ride in the opening video, but we do want to take you back for a moment to March of 2020, because that is a time when, for the dispute resolution profession, the world, things shifted oh so rapidly. In fact, Debra, I heard you say recently that the world of dispute resolution has moved forward about 10 years in the space of just one, with all the advancements, as you were just talking about, in technology and psychology and just the understanding of what we are doing online as professionals. And as you pointed out, that does continue to evolve very rapidly. And speaking of rapidly, I just wanted to remind us all for a moment of just how much we have learned in such a short period of time. If you go back in your mind and think to March of 2020, remember having to learn the different platforms that we had to learn to video conference almost overnight, it seemed. And then the different file storage and file transfer programs that we had to learn, and the different ways to sign documents and get paid. No wonder she has a headache on this screen, right? We all felt that just huge rush. But now when we look at this screen and all of these logos, in many cases, we've settled on different programs that we're all very comfortable using. We all think, Dr. Debra, don't we, that we know all we need to know about how to use these programs. But we have new things coming. The world that existed during COVID is starting to change as we emerge from COVID. And for that, you know, this is where we're at right now, I think. This is very topical. People are starting to be able to gather in the same place, but take off that mask. But that's created some new nuances to what we do as a profession. And I would posit, and Debra and I have talked about this a great deal, that we're going to now end up in a place where in person, so our pre-COVID life, is going to collide, so to speak, with our COVID world of online or virtual. And we're now going to have what they're calling the hybrid workplace, the hybrid meeting. And so we're going to be now merging our two worlds. It's not going to be 100% in person likely, nor will it be 100% virtual anymore. And this is, again, just a part of this growing process that's coming upon us so rapidly. But with rapid change, Debra, there's also difficulty assimilating, right? I think we're tired a little bit after all we had to learn in, 2020.
Yes, referencing back to what you said a moment ago, we've crammed sort of 10 years of technology and development into this last year with COVID. And, so it was a rapid learning curve for all of us in terms of, I can't just do mediation online the way I did it in person, or my arbitration. How do I do all this? And then I think then we sort of went into a lull, so to speak. We were sort of on top of technology and how we do things come 2021. But I see things ramping up again very quickly. And, I remember talking with you early on in the pandemic on your podcast where, people were amazed that they were able to actually reach agreements faster and yet struggle with being able to read behavioral clues. And so we're going to come back to more of that in our second part of our program when we talk about some of the psychological things that we need to consider. In many respects, there's a lot of advantages to being online, and yet we all sort of crave that human connection that has been absent from our lives for so many months.
Yes, we just want to be around other people. But there will be some complications as we emerge. So it is predicted, and I believe it to be true. And in fact, I think we're probably all who are out there listening to this have started to experience the new normal, which is hybrid meetings. And you see a couple of examples here on the screen. On the left-hand side, you see a very large conference room with a lot of people and one person sort of beaming in virtually. And then you have a probably even more common meeting where you have some participants, a few of the participants remote and a few of the participants in person. And we truly do believe, and it's not just Debra and I who believe that hybrids are going to be the new normal. This is really where technology has shifted, industry has shifted, the research has shifted into this realm of hybrid meetings, which also includes your hybrid mediations, your hybrid arbitrations, your hybrid trials. It's all going to be, coming down the pike and escalating quickly as people start to have options. That's one of the things I've noticed so much about the world as we evolve and move beyond COVID, Debra, is that there's a feeling that virtual was forced on us because of COVID. We had no choice, but now suddenly we do have choices. We have the choice of in-person, we have the choice of staying virtual, but a third choice will be some in-person, some virtual, this hybrid model. And I really, as we just said, that's going to be the most popular, I think.
Absolutely. And I want to just bring to our viewers' attention that there are some really important psychological aspects for how these two pictures show up. And we'll talk more about the size of the screen or the size of the picture of the people beaming in from remote locations and what we need to take into consideration about this. So changing, you might have a great setup now, but you might, as we go into hybrid, rethink the technical aspects in terms of making sure that you do show up in a way that is visible and not minimized.
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because everybody out there who's listening to this, I bet you went out and bought a ring light, and you might have an external camera and an external microphone now, and everybody has a home studio now, right? We're all set to do, I've got my microphone here, I'm talking into my external camera, but one of the things that we'll talk about now is they may not be sufficient to handle those hybrid meetings. But I did want to just, we have some statistics sort of peppered through this. We wanted you to be aware that it really isn't just Debra and I telling you that the hybrids are coming. This is really something that a great deal of research has gone into recently. This LinkedIn study was done on May 22nd to June 18th, 2021, just a month ago. And it shows these are all industries that are embracing and offering their employees full-time remote options to work from home or work remotely on a long-term basis. So essentially keeping the status quo of COVID. And just a little quickie here for those of us in the legal industry or whose dispute resolution has boundaries on legal. 41% of legal employers are offering full-time remote options long-term. This is something that is a reality in the workforce, and we are dealing with people in the workforce as mediators, as arbitrators, as professionals who offer services.
And I would add to that, Susan, that the ability to work remotely is largely dictated by the type of industry too. As you saw on that prior list, education and public administration are two that are not real conducive. Manufacturing, healthcare, again, they're very people driven or product driven. And so, to do manufacturing, you have to have, of course, your setup, and you can't take that home. And
right.
Yeah, and I'm aware of some manufacturing settings, that certainly stayed open throughout the entire COVID time. I do a lot of mediation in the education field. And so that's something that has been an ongoing struggle and challenge about people who want to stay at home and yet having to take a look at, well, what is the purpose of their job? And if it's to deliver services to students, then obviously that's a pretty hard deal to do. And we certainly see the emphasis on returning students to in-person education for the coming year.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, one of the things I found interesting is that transportation is up there as the number 2. And I think of transportation as, the subway system or the bus system, but still 46% whose employers are offering that full-time remote options and long-term. So this isn't still, we're just waiting out COVID. We're going to give it a few more months and then we'll go back to the world before COVID. That's not what's happening in the world of work. And it will not be happening, we don't believe, in the world of online dispute resolution or dispute resolution. And there were a few more statistics that we really thought sort of brought this all home. They're all relative. This is another study that was just done at the end of 2020. It's called The Rise of the Hybrid Workplace. And this was a global survey of executives and employee experience experts. Said that 58% of the workforce will work 8 or more days per month from home. Again, everyone's already set up to work from home and they don't think anything of that anymore. This statistic, 98%, really jumped out. Check this, 98% of meetings, so this is all kinds of business related meetings, will include 1 or more participants joining remotely. That is a very significant number, right? But I also wanted to include another significant number. It happens to be the same one, 98%, but it said 98% of participants express frustrations with video meetings when working remotely. I think that is extremely significant to what Debra and I are talking about today. And it goes back to what we said a little earlier. We all think we know all of those programs. We think we know Zoom. We think we know how to do our mediations or our arbitrations online. But 98% of participants who are in video meetings have issues with how it's going, with how those meetings are being conducted. So there are still issues, whether they be technological or psychological or a combination of both. And that's actually only going to be exacerbated by going to a hybrid model, because now you have that in-person mixed with that remote. And we did definitely want to mention that there are different kinds of hybrids, right, Debra?
Yes, absolutely. We're starting to see all kinds of variations on the theme, so that we can accommodate it. I think one of the things we found about, being forced onto a virtual platform is a lot of us became more productive because we weren't using the time to travel. And so a lot of cost savings have occurred as a result of the reduction of travel for many people. And so people are becoming quite creative in how they can bring people together. And we're going to be talking more about these different kinds of things. I know one of the things to emphasize here, Susan, is that Jeff Zano from the American Arbitration Association participated in my podcast earlier this 2021, and his prediction was that mediation is likely to really stay online because there are so many benefits to it. However, he did anticipate that arbitration would go back to more of an in-person model. But as our participants will see today, how AAA is set up, and very quickly so, to deliver already, virtual platforms across state lines and expanding that whole in-person hybrid look well before we even got to that point of being able to do that. And then some people are doing their pre-mediation virtually, but then bringing people together in person for the actual mediation. And one thing I'll emphasize on that note, Susan, if any of our listeners have been part of our programs before, a lot of people don't practice pre-mediation. But I think you share this viewpoint with me that pre-mediation preparation, particularly around the platform being used and how people are going to show up, have become even more important in terms of creating that safe harbor, shall we say, for parties to effectively engage in mediation, providing them with some stability, some consistency, some predictability, to then help them feel stable so that they can trust the process.
Yeah, and that's going to, I think, be even more of a challenge when you do have some of your participants that are beaming in remotely and some of them who are sitting there at that conference table with you. So I love what you pointed out, and I think there's a great deal of practicality to conducting a hybrid style where you're doing your pre-mediation meetings and prep work via a virtual medium, but then shifting to 100% in person. However, in a practical world where we're going, I'm thinking about maybe an arbitration where one of your expert witnesses is, far away, or, somebody is remote. It's going to cut down considerably to have that person testify via video, but now you're into a hybrid proceeding, right? Now you've gone to only some of the people are in person and some of them aren't. So whichever format of hybrid you're going to be working in, again, we don't want to beat Paul Revere's dead horse here, but we do believe they'll be the norm, not the exception.
Absolutely.
So go ahead, Deborah.
I was just going to say absolutely, and I think that the whole imagery of Paul Revere on the horse is that we've been galloping into new frontiers in a way that we hadn't done for a long, long time. And again, I think that exploration into a new world of doing things will still continue quite substantially as or companies continue to look at technology and how things can be done differently. And so feedback from people like you, from me, our participants, is really critically important to help get the right kind of input to these organizations who are working on the technology.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the things that we'll talk about as options for handling the technology issues that arise in a hybrid are things that have come about specifically in response to feedback that the tech companies have gotten from us. So that is another benefit that has come out of this concerted shift. But now that we find ourselves going out and potentially having these hybrid mediations, there are practical issues. There are technological issues. You can't really just flip open your laptop and go in that home studio that we've been talking about, or your office studio as you had before. Nor can you just go sit in your conference room if you're going to have people beaming in remotely. So I chose these two pictures just to give a couple of the ideas about some of the practical issues, the technical issues that come up when you're doing a hybrid. So the picture on the left of the students staring into the Apple Mac screens, this is actually a picture taken recently of a classroom. As the classrooms have started to open up, but still wanting to keep the numbers small, what they've gone to is a hybrid classroom. Some of the students participate in the classroom, like these young folks, and some of them are beaming in. But what has that resulted in? It has resulted in a room full of students staring at computer screens, not interacting with each other. So in this particular picture, you can't see the teacher in this, but in the article I was reading, the teacher is actually present in the room with these students, but has a screen to the left where all of the remote students appear on the screen. It's got the zoom on that it's sort of a large television monitor. And so the teachers actually turn to that monitor, and all of these students are looking at each other through the screen. And that's what's going to happen if you go into a conference room with all of your participants on a laptop or a computer to participate and interact with your remote participants via video conferencing, at least on a video screen, right? And on the right-hand screen, you have 3 people together in one room, but imagine they are now trying to work off of this one laptop. So they all have to get a little cozy in order to be seen together. And I've actually participated as a beaming in co-mediator into a family law mediation where the 2 participants were present with my co-mediator in a conference room. And we did that with a laptop at the end of the conference table. And the 3 of them had to sit very close to each other all the way at the end of the conference table in order to all be seen on the screen. And then they basically had to yell because the computer was all the way down at the end of the screen. And it was very unnatural. And I can tell you very quickly, they forgot my presence because it was much easier to turn to the person in the room, which will be a lot of what Debra talks about on the psychological. But so it comes down to video. You need to consider that you need to have cameras, not camera likely, but cameras, or a way to get the video of all of your in-person participants. And you will need a display in the room for all of the remote participants. And you may need an additional display if you want to also be able to screen share. So you have 2 issues there. You will also have audio issues. You need a microphone that's going to pick up the voice of all of the participants who are in person so that the people who are remote can hear. And then you will also need speakers that are placed in the room, in the in-person room, so that all of the remote people, when speaking, are heard throughout the room, depending on how many participants you have. And that's just, what you need to have in the actual room. All of your remote participants, of course, have to have a video setup. So the other question is the placement of all of these devices. And again, are you going to be like the students on the left, or will your in-person people be like the very cozy trio on the right? Well, good news. There is some technology that has come along, and there's been a great deal of work done that gives us some potential tech solutions. And I'm happy to say they come in a variety of price points. I have done, this is a topic I've spoken on much more briefly, but in other presentations about a month and 2 months ago. And I can tell you, even a month or 2 months ago, the options I'm going to talk about now didn't exist, only the most expensive one. And people weren't very happy with me, saying that's awfully expensive, Susan. So I'm going to start with the good news, the least expensive. So now these are all available on Amazon. I went there because it was the easiest, quickest place. And so that's where I've pulled my information on them. I do want to say, other than the most expensive, I have not used this information. So I want you to just know that so that I can, I'm not endorsing these products. I've done my research on them. They have good reviews, but I don't know the efficacy of each of the products, but I wanted you to know what was available. So for about $160, there's this New Room conference webcam, and that has microphone and speaker right in it, and a high def 1080 pixel video camera. It's a wide angle 100 degrees. So you still would have people having to sit at one end of the table, but not in that unnaturally close, cozy buddy way. And so this one camera that you can see up at the top has that wide angle sort of bird's eye view that will be able to pull in all of the participants, and it has the microphone and speaker built in. Then there's a little bit more expensive and kind of fun, about $930. It's called the Meeting Owl Pro. And the thing that's nice about this is it has a 360-degree video conference camera. So everyone can be sitting at the conference table where they would normally sit and still be visible. Plus, it also has, of course, the microphone and speakers, smart zooming and noise equalizing. This one actually had really good reviews. People seem to really like this. And then there is the one that I've talked about before, Logitech. Very early on, toward the end of 2020, realized hybrid was coming. Hybrid is coming. And so they put a lot of technology and work into coming up with something called their Rally system. They have Rally Mini, Rally Plus, and Rally Bar. And this is a premium Ultra HD AI assisted system that is basically a conference room system for any size conference room, small conference room, all the way up to a large conference room. And Debra mentioned AAA has already, I don't know if they're using the Logitech version, but they're using a version of this tech suite, and we're going to show you a video of that. The one thing I want to point out about this is it is at that higher price point, but it is really the top of the line. And Logitech was smart. They went out to Microsoft Teams, they went out to Cisco, they went out to Zoom, they went to all of the major players in video conferencing, and this is already integrated with all of those systems. So there's no learning curve in using those video conferencing systems. But these, I'm sorry, go ahead, Debra.
Yes, I'd just like to add is that, of course, researching, getting prepared for this program to make sure that we were, the latest and greatest of information. There's two things I'd like to say. In terms of investment, one of the articles I read talked about at least 62% of organizations are making, significant investments into their setup and so forth. And I'll give you an example, is that I work with a local municipality, and they were back, like it showed in that one slide, public administration, they were back on the work site far earlier than a lot of us. I would still be the remote mediator, but all the parties would be, down this long conference room with the camera way at one end, and then they were still wearing their masks. And so it was very difficult to hear them. It was difficult to see who was talking. Certainly the ability to read body language was incredibly reduced, And so this is where, again, we're rethinking how we set things up. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that is a really great article when you think about, well, what are my options here? Great article by the Harvard Business Review just came out in June of 2021 also. And we'll include the link in our follow-up materials to our participants. It's called What It Takes to Run a Great Hybrid Meeting. So you can certainly Google it yourself or wait for our link. But very nicely done as far as what are some tips. And they give some ideas about using little mini webcams by laptops. And sometimes it might even be more important to have a special laptop just for the presentation, for example. So I thought a lot of good ideas that people might glean something valuable from.
Well, and such a good point, Debra, because it's all one, technology and research continue to happen. I will tell you a month from now, as you're watching this, there will be new information. So this is something that is rapidly evolving. In fact, just this week, Zoom announced that in their Zoom rooms for hybrid workforces, they have now launched a public beta. So it's available to all of us to try out. It's called Smart Gallery. And essentially what Smart Gallery is in Zoom rooms, so not your regular Zoom meeting, but if you have Zoom rooms, if you have up to 3 people in the room, then Zoom is going to send 3 separate video streams for each of those people. So rather than have that, again, artificial pushing together, the people who are remote from the 3 people who are in person will see them each as a thumbnail on the screen, which Debra puts everybody right in that parity. Mm-hmm. Everybody is now visually the same on the screen. There has to be some benefit to that.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the things I'll talk a little bit further about, but one of the most common complaints from people who are coming in from a remote location is the tendency to feel isolated, to feel cut out or left out by the participants in the room. And so I'll have some tips to share with those of us who lead meetings and mediations and arbitrations on things to be aware of. It's all about awareness.
It's the number one thing. And just for those who are interested, Zoom Rooms is about $500 per year. So for the whole year, but you can try it out for 30 days for free if anyone's interested. And then the last option, just to make sure you're all aware, is places like WeWork and Regus and the rental conference space that we used to go get when we had large mediations or a big arbitration. They are all adding virtual suites. They know what's coming as well. So if you don't want to outlay any capital, this is something that you might consider, and it's a cost that you might be able to pass on to your participants if what they want is a hybrid proceeding. But we mentioned Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Guthrie, your mediator in this dispute involving Long Island Art Workshop and Queens Construction. I want to thank you all for selecting me as your mediator, and I hope that we're going to be able to reach settlement today. I've read through all of your pre-mediation submissions, and I believe that this is a perfect case for mediation and settlement. Let's review some of the initial ground rules for today. You know that I, your mediator, am remote, and counsel and parties are both located in the AAA ICDR offices in New York. So when we need to meet individually with one party or one party and their counsel, I'm going to ask that the other party wait in the room next door. So let's do some quick introductions. Mr. Zano, if you go first.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Guthrie, and thank you for being here today. And I'm Jeff Zano, counsel for Long Island Art Workshop. This is my client, Ann Lesser, the president of the Long Island Workshop.
Thank you, Mr. Zano. And Ms. Vega.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Guthrie. I'm Jacqueline Vega, counsel for Queens Construction, and this is my client, Michael Mara, the owner of the company.
Thank you both. So let me hear why we're here today. If I could have a quick summary, first from you, Mr. Zano, and then from you, Ms. Vega.
Well, thank you. Well, bottom line, Queens Construction did a horrible job constructing an additional art studio for Long Island Artworks. There were delays, cost overruns, and the job is still not completed. Still not completed. Frankly, the site is now very, very dangerous.
No, this is ridiculous. I will not have my good name slandered today. The reason the job is not completed is because you, Ms. Lesser, will not let my team back on the property. This is insane.
Mr. Mara, the reason this job is not completed is because you were doing a terrible job, and I had to stop you from destroying my pre-existing structure.
Ann, please, we cannot have this turn into a shouting match, please.
Yes, counselor. You should really learn how to control your crazy client.
I'm not crazy.
Fine. Please, no name calling, and let's let the mediator do her job. You agreed to mediate, and you wanted to resolve this matter.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Let's turn down the temperature in the room a bit, and remember not to talk over each other and interrupt. It does make the transmission of your audio very difficult for me to hear. I want to assure you, you will each have plenty of time to discuss your case. I think at this time, it might be a good idea to meet individually with each party.
Thank you, Ms. Guthrie.
So bravo to AAA. As you can see, the technology generally works very well. Those artificial intelligence assisted cameras really do move around the room so that you feel like you're getting a full face view of each participant. There are some other, though, technology related issues around those cameras that you might have noticed. One little tip is that you may have noticed when the attorneys were introducing their clients, because the clients did not say anything, the cameras did not pick them up and move to them. So you never actually saw, or I, the mediator, never actually saw them. So just a little note as we're prepping our clients to work with artificial intelligence assisted cameras is that if we are introduced or they want to say something, again, hand motions aren't going to do it, much like in courtroom, you need to be verbal. But those are the things that we can start prepping our clients for. But there were some other things I know when we've shown this video before, Debra, that we have received some feedback on the psychological side. So that being your area, I'm going to toss it to you now.
Very good. Yes, again, things have evolved through COVID as far as the social distancing that we were, required to maintain for a long time, and so you can see the parties very spaced out. And again, with that kind of oblong table, then it sort of puts one side against the other, and that happens naturally in in-person settings as well. But we can create that us against them kind of mentality, and the idea for parties to be present with the mediator remote. Again, there has been a lot said about loss of control of the room, easy to shut the mediator out as parties started to argue. And so it's about setting up those logistical kinds of things up front and what I call being transparent. And so again, letting people know what to expect takes place before you even get into the mediation room. Your credibility actually goes up by showing your command and knowledge of the technology, and you're very clear on how you're going to run your process. And so that can start taking place even as you are in this kind of hybrid setting that AAA is set up. The things that's so important, I think, that as stewards of the process is that, much like this picture shows, my favorite place in Avalon Bay on Santa Catalina Island here in California, is that it is our job. It is our responsibility to create that safe place so people can actually engage around difficult matters, things that they are in conflict around. So I like to say the role and goal of a mediator and arbitrator is about creating that safe harbor. And so having them prepared with the technology, knowing what to expect, being transparent becomes critically important as we shift once again into this new world. So it's all about setting the stage. And again, I can't emphasize enough how much that starts before the actual formal process. And so, as we said earlier, it is simply about being aware of this new normal and the emphasis on the necessity of being prepared through premediation. I have to admit, I didn't always do premediation either. However, the more and more we've moved into this world of virtual and hybrid, the more critical it is. And even then, people may not pay attention. And so I make sure I schedule meetings with people so we know. I had a recent mediation where, even though I sent them my guidelines, for some reason, they decided to have just the employee in front of the screen with me, and they were off to the side. And so that was a very awkward kind of thing, not really knowing what was going on and just not having them accessible. And so that's where we talk again about being remote and in person. So we really want to create a quality experience, a first-class experience for everybody. And that's where your role as a mediator or an arbitrator becomes so important, really being a master facilitator of these multiple settings and multiple people. And also being aware of minimizing bias, because we all have it, but also reducing fatigue from Zoom. And I think that was one of the biggest comments early on, is that, oh, how tired we would be after being on Zoom all day. Well, what contributes to that? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And what's coming ahead, as Susan mentioned, Zoom is coming out with Smart Gallery and more artificial intelligence, where the cameras can actually track voices. And that's another reason why everyone talking at once is a problem. But then also MS Teams is also doing some new things with hybrid meeting rooms. And so something to be on the lookout. We continue to learn, live, apply what we learn, and then grow. Because as Susan mentioned, it's going to be a fast moving world as we go on. And so, yes, the way we've worked, or the way we work, has changed forever. There's none of this going back to the way it was. Certainly some environments have not been impacted quite as much, but for the vast majority really have, and we've shown you some of those stats. And again, some recent research, McKinsey, that does a lot of things around the workplace, found that 90% of organizations are likely to adopt some combination of remote and on-site work capabilities. And for a lot of them, they've been able to reduce overhead too, but they're finding the need to bring employees in periodically just to maintain that socialization and maintain that sense of team. And so again, we'll continue to see more evolve about this, particularly with the psychological implications. I mentioned already, people who work remotely tend to feel isolated. And so there does tend to be some not being part of the team. And again, psychologically, those people remote versus those of us on site. And I think another really important consideration here, the millennials, which basically, run from about ages 24 to 44, 1977 to 1997, are now part of our largest workforce, about 35% and growing, particularly as baby boomers continue to retire or move on to other things. They're going to be the real drivers of our future workplace, and they're already very tech savvy. So millennials as a group definitely want this to continue as we go on. In another way, the workforce has evolved. This one comes from Metrigy's Workplace Collaboration, just again, 21-22, studying more than 475 organizations. As you can see, and Susan referenced this before about choices, employees want to be able to choose where and how they work. And so 36.4%, in fact, so pretty significant. About 38% would work from home, want to continue working from home. In fact, millennials will even leave their current job if not allowed to work at home. And you can see a very, very small percentage are actually returning full-time into the office. And some people, as Susan mentioned before, part-time office, part-time home, and a very small percentage are just not sure yet. Some people are still trying to figure it out. Susan, is this what you're seeing around your trainings, your mediation and things like that?
Absolutely. 100%. Most of the people that I speak to are not interested in going back to 100% in person. Honestly, I don't think I've spoken to a single professional. And I think it's really significant that you have these stats, because for those of you who are saying, well, this is the general workforce, why are we talking about it when it comes to dispute resolution? Well, these are the people in some fashion who, for me, are getting a divorce, or for Debra doing employment, are in an employment dispute or a construction dispute or a personal injury dispute. The workforce is the public. They, no matter what we want, they are going to want hybrid proceedings.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I found this quote from Robert Townsend, who is from a very large law firm in the United States. Being tech savvy and being experienced in those online virtual platforms is going to help you become a better negotiator, create better security as well as confidentiality when you keep all those things into mind. Because people need to feel safe in order to proceed in navigating through conflict. And that's where your role, your credibility, your stature, your reputation can actually flourish when they see how expertly you are able to conduct an online or hybrid mediation and arbitration. However, there's a caveat. If we thought there was opportunities for bias before, there are even more opportunities now. And I mentioned bias is sort of a natural kind of thing. It happens every day. We all do it, make assumptions about things, have attitudes about things. And it is pretty automatic and hardwired. And that's why it's so important that we also develop our skills in emotional intelligence so that we are tuned in to where we are and how we show up and what attitudes we might have towards these different settings. Because so the impact of preparation is huge. And again, your reputation, how you show up, will be enhanced by being more well-versed. And again, definitely telling people who's in charge. And that's where it's so important then that you be able to retain mastery as well as control of your virtual environment, so that, again, in how things are set up. I like to talk about being transparent. I actually have a setup of where I have 3 screens in front of me. So as I'm mediating, I'll say, well, just so you know, I have a screen over here, I have a screen over here. I may be sharing documents with you here periodically. And I just want you to know what I'm looking at and when I'm don't have direct eye contact with you. And that also then deals into this whole video versus non-video versus in person. Again, there can be if you can't see somebody, if they're not showing up with video, you feel like you're talking into a void. Whereas if we have video, then the quality of your setup and technology becomes so important. And then we've talked about some of the things to look for when people are in person and the importance of having cameras and voice activated directional things so that people can still be a part of it. And that's why I really like that Harvard Business Review article that I referenced earlier, and that will be part of your handout, because it really does give some good ideas about things to take into consideration. And the last area then is, again, quality of the process and technology. And this partly comes out of the standards of competency for mediators. And I know, Susan, you can address that as well for lawyers in general, right?
Yeah, I think there's just that general understanding, one of our ethical canons is to represent our clients competently. Competency online includes competency in your platform, in your technology, in understanding the psychology of what's happening. To me, I feel that's an inherent part of being competent.
Thank you. Yes. And so with that, then it's real important, again, to look at the quality of your equipment and your process, because distortions will, again, create annoyance, frustration, attitude. There we are again, and again, bias. Disruptions, unexpected disruptions in your internet quality, again, can lead to frustration, annoyance, and again, attitude. And then we talked already about the importance of trying to minimize, if not eliminate, the interruptions. And so that's why, it's really easy to see a hand raised if somebody wants to talk when we're on screen or when we're in the hybrid setting. And so getting clear about what kinds of tools and rules will you implement, and educating your parties around that. And I've already touched on the isolation piece of this several times. It's really easy for people in person to then disregard the person, that's on the screen. And so that's why when I pointed out with a couple of photos before, why it's so important that if there is a remote person or persons, that the screens be large enough to give a good, almost full person viewing of that person, so they're on the same par, so to speak, with the people in the room. So life size appearance becomes really important, so that we don't minimize and then unintentionally, attitudinally also minimize. And so with these kinds of considerations, then even people who are remote can still be actively engaged, actively part of the conversation, the discussion. And again, rethinking our technology around these kinds of things to avoid these kinds of things. And one of the other things I just wanted to comment before I go to our next slide is also educating your participants who may be remote around seeking a quiet environment, being mindful of dogs barking in the background, garbage trucks running outside the street, those kinds of things too, because you may not realize how much it may mask the audio. And so making sure you have not only good video, but good audio too, and ensuring, trying to prevent those external noises from interrupting the process. I do want to say a little bit more about bias though. And so, we do have our cognitive brain and our emotional brain, and we think from both areas. And so again, when we have those annoyances, those frustrations from these distortions, interruptions, isolation, et cetera, we can be responding in ways that we think is cognitive, but is actually coming from an emotional perspective. Therefore, we may not be making the best decisions. And we naturally put people into categories. Again, the us versus them, or online, in person. And then before we know it, they quickly become wired in our brain. And now these are habitual ways of thinking. And so we need to challenge ourselves in saying, am I showing up with some attitude? Am I showing preference for the participants depending upon where they're located? And then that influences how we think. Our whole pattern of thinking towards participants. And so I let people know that, there are things that can come up with this hybrid world now that actually may influence how we think. And that's why it's important to pause. And then, we learn them in all kinds of ways. And so it's important, again, to be mindful of your own attitude, your own biases that you might have, and how that might show up in our participants as we lead them through mediation or arbitration. Because these distortions become fatiguing. And so Zoom fatigue is real and continues. And so again, one of the things that comes up is that we are processing so many things, in front of us, that our brains are literally firing more rapidly and therefore consuming energy in ways that we didn't even know. And that's why there's a shift towards doing shorter sessions. They do recommend you take a 5 or 10 minute break every hour if you're on Zoom or a virtual platform regularly. And quite honestly, I know that for many of us, it used to be, we would reach agreement either through starvation or exhaustion. And those days, now that we're going hybrid, really are counterproductive. And when you think about it, our ability to think and solve problems is actually impeded when we haven't taken a rest. And so there are a couple things then, to be aware of. And so the taking a break, getting off the screen, being able to get up and stretch and relax actually keeps people more refreshed. And the other thing about being on screen is that we're looking at all these faces. And so we're trying to read visual cues for where are they coming from and so forth. And so another thing would be is having a speaker view. So whomever is speaking is the one that comes up larger on the screen during their piece, shall we say. And then that way they're more alive, more on par with the size of the other people. Another thing is to simply practice doing what we call the 20-20-20, is standing up from a sitting position about every 20 minutes, looking away from your computer for about 20 seconds, and then looking up to 20 feet away. That keeps your eye muscles exercised. It also relieves the brain from that ongoing monitor viewing, but also allows everybody to stand up and move around, which actually gets them moving. And so those are a few things. Like I said, it's all about awareness, Susan, being aware of how these different things can impact.
Well, and I think you made a very good point, Deborah. As we go back to a hybrid situation where we do have some participants with us in the room, we may forget that we have remote participants who are subject to Zoom fatigue and think that it's okay to go back to the marathons because some of our participants are in person. And we need to remember that it will be continuing to be fatiguing for our remote participants. But I believe that everyone will be more fatigued because we are switching between a focus in the room and a focus to the virtual, which I think just ramps up the Zoom fatigue potential.
Absolutely. Yes. I know that's a big complaint from a lot of people is that they're literally on the screen all day long or sitting all day long.
Yeah.
And we actually become better decision makers when we refresh, rehydrate, and sort of regenerate. And so I think that if we practice these kinds of things, in how we manage our meetings, we will actually create better opportunities for reaching resolution in ways we may not have experienced before by taking into consideration all of these things. So my words to our viewers is facilitate wisely. Facilitate wisely. And this visual is a good example of what we might anticipate in our worlds to come. And so knowing how to leverage your technology and your tools, revisiting your process because there is added complexity. And because of what we experience, the handful of users, so to speak, back when COVID first happened, but we quickly saw the world explode with how many users were on Zoom. And as time has gone on, the quality of our managing things online has improved too. And so now we actually have raised expectations for how good is the process and how well are you doing it, mediator or arbitrator. But we also want to be thoughtful in our meeting design. And so we just touched on this, but making sure you're building in, 5-minute, 10-minute breaks. I do a lot of online teaching. And so while I always took breaks before, I always build in a 5-minute break after the first hour, a 10-minute after the second hour, either do 5 or 10 minutes again, the third hour before we actually break for the day. And so training is no longer full day sessions either. We go to half day sessions because otherwise it's just simply too much. And then we also want to create an environment where everybody feels engaged, valued, and equal, whether you're sitting in the same room or an ocean away. So with that, Susan, again, there is that technological element that we talked about in the beginning, but then there's a heavy psychological component too that we need to keep in mind for all of our participants to create that safe harbor so people do feel comfortable and that they can trust that your job and that you're managing it well.
Right.
So let's share with our viewers a few takeaways. I've already emphasized how strongly I believe premediation preparation is key to this process. And I would suggest, even if you're doing it in person, your parties, think about it, anytime you go to something brand new or you haven't participated in it, there's always a level of anxiety. Would you agree, Susan?
Absolutely, right? Especially for our participants, we forget, but for them, absolutely.
Yeah. And I know one thing that we were actually into the COVID period a couple, 2-3 months before I said, oh, I need to change my protocols and what I send out to participants. And I've had to revamp my whole opening mediator comments or remarks in the beginning. And so, what about you, Susan?
Yeah, I went online so long ago. I changed everything in the early days, but I have continued to need and have to update things as I've gone along. And I would say to everyone, you need to make these adjustments again as you go into your hybrid settings, because you need to make sure that your participants understand the complexities of the hybrid mediation room or arbitration room. You and I have talked about this in other presentations, Deborah, but another aspect of our ethical duties is to make sure that all of our participants are making educated and informed decisions. And so when a client says to you, oh, I don't want to come to your office, I'll just beam in from my office, they may be doing that because they want to avoid traffic. They need to understand all of the psychological implications of that choice, as well as the technology implications that they will need if they're going to remotely participate. So that pre-mediation information and amending your opening statement, I think, is critical.
Yes, again, I like to say, people won't know where they're going, and then they won't know when they get there. So that's part of our job as a facilitator of the process then, is to educate them and keep them informed. And it really is about shaping the mindset. And we have that opportunity before the mediation even starts. I like to say, thank them for agreeing to mediation. You're already shaping the mindset, getting to yes. And so the more you do that, then the more comfortable they're going to be in the process. And so, again, taking a look at what kinds of modifications would be important for you to make. What's worked well, what doesn't work so well, what do others have to say? And using inclusion strategies. As I mentioned earlier, that it's real common for remote participants to feel left out, to feel isolated, to feel talked over by the people in the room. And so this is where, as the facilitator of the process, the hybrid process, critically important that you are using your awareness to keep people included. And be transparent. As I mentioned, I actually tell people I've got 3 screens here, and so I will be looking away. And periodically, I'm not always going to have direct eye contact here. Even encouraging people to that it's okay to briefly turn off their screen. But then we can also avoid that if we just take scheduled breaks, and that way everybody gets a chance to refresh. Otherwise, we can exhaust people, not even know it. And so, and to let people say, hey, you can go ahead and request a break if you'd like. One of the things I forgot to mention, Susan, about the Zoom fatigue is that, we are actually looking at ourselves too. And so that can be exhausting, by constantly being aware of how am I showing up. And so that's actually another little added piece of pressure. And then I'd like to close our last takeaway here with strive for peak performance. Prepare, educate, acknowledge, and connect. So I call it the peak performance of the mediator and arbitrator. And so one of the things to always keep in mind, and this comes from a Gallup study done way back in 2002, is how important it is to say thank you to your participants for choosing the medium that they're choosing to be at the mediation, to say thank you for sharing your perspective, thank you for raising your hand. Powerful in terms of how we shape our mindset. And so Paul Revere galloping away. Well, I don't think that Gallup is going to be quite as fast in 21, 22 as it was in 2020, but always keep learning, living, and growing, because the world is still a-changing. Susan?
Sure is. And what I said in the beginning holds true. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or want any information. Susan at MostynGuthrie.com, and Debra's email is
dr.dupree at relationships-at-work.com.
And thank you for joining us.